Hi, it's Moshe Taragin for Parshas Naso for the OU All Parsha video series. Parshas Naso, very long parsha, unnaturally extended to 176 by the repetition of all those psukim of the Nesim, even though their korbanos were identical. Very provocative, why the Torah spends so much real estate on things that seem implicit, repetitious, sheer unto itself. But I want to talk about Nazir, one of the two very intriguing stories, not stories, but halachic stories, profiles in Parshas Naso. The mentions in Leviah, mentions other, but basically we're looking at the Nazir and the Sota. That's what catches our attention. They each appear once, more or less, in the Torah, as opposed to some of the other halachos that are repeated throughout the Torah. And the Nazir is intriguing because there's a paradox. On the one hand, he's Kadosh, and the Torah calls him Kadosh, Kodeshu Lashem. On the other hand, the Torah says, V'chipra alav mesher chat al nefesh. He has to bring a korban chatas. Already bring a korban chatas. So evidently, the Nazir is a very delicate combination between lofty intentions, lofty performance, lofty behavior, but inherent perils that maybe aren't considered a sin, although you can call them a sin, or a quasi-sin, or a proto-sin, but have to be checked before they can become a little sinful or sin-like. And what makes Nazir so interesting, intriguing, and helpful is because more or less, when you break it down, a Nazir is someone who adopts a chumrah. Now, these are not just personal chumras, but chumras the Torah prescribes. Those of you who are lamdanim, you may think about how a person becomes a Nazir, famous Brisker Rav. Is he creating this Isser, this Isser, this Isser, or he's becoming a Nazir and obligating himself to become a Nazir? But that's for the Lamdas. This is not a shir about Lamdas. Maybe next year I'll give an all Lamdas shir. But chumras are very, very personal and intimate moment in the religious experience of an Oved Hashem. One of the earliest Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos, Asiu Siag LaTorah, you should be machmir, you should create fences. Where it comes from, what the pasuk that initiates chumros, v'asu mishmeres lemishmarti, you should protect and preserve the purity and sanctity. And so much of halacha is predicated on chumros. Muktzah, for example, is one large institutionalized chumrah. We don't know it's a chumrah because it became halachically foundational. Bal Yira, Bal Yamatzeh, according to Tosos in the beginning of Psachim, the fact that not only can we not eat chametz, but you can't even own chametz, because at least according to Tosos, the Torah itself is creating a chumrah. Don't own it lest you come to eat it. And it's reflective of a person who schar char mila nazir. The Gemara says when referring to a nazir, we tell a nazir don't just avoid wine, but avoid any trace, any contact, because Isurim are not something to be lackadaisical about. They're not something to be easygoing about, not something to play around with. You're playing with fire. And if you realize that Isurim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bans for us or from us, are toxic in ways we sometimes don't know. I don't know why shatnez is bad for me. I would never put on shatnez, but if I did, I don't think my body would start to tremble and quake. But Hashem doesn't want me to wear shatnez, so this must be something. Hashem isn't arbitrary. Hashem isn't random. A famous story about the Vilna Gaon who was at the Shabbos table, and one of the people at the table was playing with fish bones or nutshells because they're muktzah. Just as though in the Shabbos playing with nutshells. I said, you shouldn't be touching nutshells other than just removing them, graf shel rei. So the Vilna Gaon was so shocked that he fainted. So they quickly revived the Vilna Gaon and had forgotten to remove the nutshells or the fish bones. Sorry, it's very dry in Eretz Yisrael today. So he fainted again. So Baruch Hashem, before they revived him a second time, his Rebbe said, first take away the shells of the bones. Now, no one's a Vilna Gaon, and I don't recommend fainting. Not that you can control fainting, but do we look at Isurim as, in that vein, in that light? I think people who are very, very, very makbid on machalos asuros and very, very makbid on kashrus. I don't mean OU kashrus, but extreme measures of kashrus, or those measures that people find extreme, are to be commended for this, because it's not just, I'll try my best, and if I come up short, not the end of the world, but There's machalas asur. It's going into my body. It's not just some contact with isur, and my body will be changed. Metamtem misalev. So, I want to talk about some of the perils of chumrah, and that's why the Torah refers to a nazir as a chote, and that's why, again, the word chote may be hyperbolic, although it brings a chatas, it may be more preventative and prophylactic, but that a sin shouldn't be born to preempt it. But I don't want this shir to be in any way misunderstood as anti-chumras, and chumras are unhealthy, and chalila v'chas. It's a very intimate and delicate moment in the lifetime of an Oved Hashem when you feel this is something I should be machmir on because I'm scared of it. I think the Rabbeinu Yonah in Shari Tshuva calls a chumrah the signal expression of Yiras Shamayim. So it expresses Yiras Shamayim, not necessarily Avas Hashem, which is interesting but understandable. All that being said, what are some of the issues that a Nazir courts, the dangers a Nazir invites, that we can trace similar patterns in chumras when misapplied? A lot to talk about. Okay, so number one, the Rambam. The Rambam's the obvious. The Rambam writes that the reason he is called a chote is because he upsets the very delicate balance that Hashem expects us to calibrate between Olam Hazeh and disengagement from Olam Hazeh. We're put in this world. We're not meant to be monks and nuns. We're meant to eat. We're meant to interact with this world. We're meant to enjoy this world as long as we remain within the boundaries both of halacha and of spiritual well-being, not to be nevel b'shus haTorah, as the Ramban writes in Kedoshim. Make brachos, eat kosher food, abstinence, temperate. But it's a very, very delicate balance, and not everyone gets it right. And to be honest, not everyone wants to get it right. There's, as the Rambam himself writes in Hilchos Deos, if you feel that you swung to one end, you're too detached from the world, then you may have to redirect and radicalize to even things out. And of course, vice versa, if you're too indulgent in the world. But ideally, we're not supposed to present religion as abstinence and deprivational and suffering and not eating and dark and heavy. And the Nazir is slightly recalibrating it by adding Yisurim. And that is, again, I'm using very, very careful words. That's a partial distortion of religion. And it can lead to two very, very different but equally dangerous consequences. One is people themselves, other people, may be deterred from buying because they'll see the Nazir and they'll think this is the real religion. How many people out there were turned off from Avodas Hashem because they met the wrong person and the wrong rabbi and the wrong religious role model? And in many cases, because religion was presented as heavy and punishments and consequences and death, and Hashem is angry, and that's not the Avodas Hashem that we pursue. That's not the Tam Kitov Hashem. That's not the Avodas Hashem B'Simcha. And it's not just the worry that the Nazir's role model would deter other people from buying in, but the Nazir himself will live a life that is, and a person who's machmir himself, it's heavy and tense and coiled with anxiety and OCD, and did I recite Sfira? Did I not recite Sfira? Did I get it right? Did I not get it right? Did I say Shema? And it just hollows out. It sucks out the joy and the simcha of Omen Lefnei Hashem, of Tov Lev Mishtat Hamid, as the Rama concludes Shulchan Aruch Or Chaim. So for the Rambam, the danger of a Nazir and the corresponding danger of a Chumrah is you're weighting, W-E-A-G-H-T, you're weighting religion wrong. It's very, very delicate. It's very delicate to be involved in the world, not to be involved in the world. Everyone has their own balance, and I spoke about this in Parshas Kedoshim. The Nesiv talks about this. Everyone has their own balance of Kedoshim to you. And more abstractly, everyone has the balance of how much they smile during Avodas Hashem and how much they frown and furrowed eyebrows. And you have to have a little bit of both. But the Nazir is starting to rearrange the elements of Avodas Hashem, and for this the Rambam takes him to task. The second issue that you have to be careful with when adopting a Chumrah is one of proportion. Sometimes you can inflate halacha so much that anytime you inflate something, like money, like currency, there's too much money out there, so the money that is out there loses its value because there's too much of it. And the more precious something is, the more you guard it and protect it. So Chumras are wonderful as long as you keep proper proportion and you realize the difference between a chumrah and between the core halacha. And sometimes in our language, we're too quick to say the word aser about something which really isn't aser, but maybe a bad idea. And I spoke about this in different parsha about the capacity for independent moral thinking, and not to have to ban something only because it's aser. You can ban it or prohibit it because it's not wise, even if it's not aser. But the second damage that this could cause is if everything is aser, then the word aser doesn't resonate with the same potency that it should. If something's aser, it's a red line. You never cross that line. There's no flexibility. But minhagim are meant to be suspended at the right time. Chumras and minhagim at the right time in the right context. And for example, again, depending upon the chumrah, you shouldn't suspend muktzah. Muktzah is already an institutionalized chumrah. But shouldn't chumras be suspended for kavod habrios? It's not always a binary choice. You could find out ahead of time which restaurant to go to, find out ahead of time which people to eat by. But the notion that something is kosher, but you're going to be machmir to the point that you'll insult someone and be over in kavod habrios, which is not a chumrah, it's the rabbanan, I don't know a way to justify it. So don't go around suspending chumras at will, but know there's a time and a place for a chumras to be suspended. And I'm not a huge posek, but this is ABCs of chumras, to know when you can't be machmir because you just don't have the capacity to be machmir. I mean, just my own personal experience was dominated in the last couple of months by my son's stay in the hospital, and we were cut off from everything. We were in Haifa, which is where he was flown to, and we were there every day trying to find food to eat because we didn't really have a place. People were trying to be as generous as possible to send food, but 3 meals a day for a large group of people. And at some point, the army arranged with the kitchen in the hospital, which is kosher. The army arranged they would send us plates of food every day for lunch. And in the beginning, I fell into my normal chumrah mode. Okay, what's the machmir? I'm not such a super machmir, but certainly me, it's red meat. A machmir only to have a certain hashkacha. And at a certain point, it was just, we didn't have the bandwidth for it. And I'm going to say there were more important things to deal with, but there are other things I had to pay attention to in my family and for my son's health. And the food was kosher. I knew the mashgiach. He was watching all the food. It's not like I was wondering that there was hanky-panky going on in the kitchen behind my back. Everything was kosher, but he just said, the meat we have is rabbanot at this time. I don't remember what the meat was, and at a certain point, just for 6 weeks, we had to eat whatever we found available. It wasn't b'koach nefesh. Don't worry, we could have just found a better place to eat. But that to me was the moment that I felt like this was a legitimate suspension of a chumrah to serve a higher purpose that I felt was Ratzon Hashem, family harmony, and keeping everyone calm, and helping my son get better, and not having to introduce a new stress into an already stressful situation. So sometimes we lose, as Rav Amital, my Rebbe, what I would say, you have to know there's a difference between how you tie your shoes and the sequence by which you tie your shoes, which, by the way, is purely Kabbalah. So even those who keep it and keep that halacha, it's Kabbalistically infused. Again, it has sources in the Gemara, but it doesn't carry the same halachic gravity that, let's say, Kriya Shema does. And Kriya Shema is Kabbalas Malchus Shemayim, it's a mitzvah and a kavanah, and to be able, again, it's not a chumrah, but it's a Kabbalah, but sometimes we don't understand the proper boundaries between halacha proper and chumrah that we overlay, and it leads to the backwash where, because everything is halacha and everything becomes this large amorphous system of behavior, the inability to create resolution between halacha and chumrah ironically can drain halacha of its importance, because it's just a certain tipping point. You can't breathe depth, passion, and intensity to everything. There's only a limited amount you can breathe it into. So if you're operating on full RPMs and full velocity for every single halacha, and every single chumrah, and every single, at a certain point, you're going to lose that velocity. You're going to lose that intensity, because you can't. And there has to be high RPMs, revolutions per minute, and lower RPMs, or else the engine's going to burn out. And I don't mean burn out, you'll leave religion. It's just religion will become less intense and less passionate and less animated. So the second problem of a chumrah, and there's a Yishalmi like this, lo dayecha b'masha asur Torah. Again, that can mean many different things. Not enough what the Torah gave you. You're adding things. By adding things to what the Torah gave you, you're actually depleting and hollowing out some of the mitzvahs and averos that you're meant to keep in the Torah. Of course, the more well-known, this is number 3, the more well-known critique of Chazal, which dovetails with the fact that he's called a chote. Again, those who are following along, it's Rabbi Eliezer who says he's called a chote. It's the Gemara in Tanis, the Gemara in Nedarim, 3 or 4 places in Shas, he's Nikra chote. Tanis Yud Aleph, and the Rambam is in Deis Perek Gimel, where he talks about altering the balance between deprivation and engagement, or indulgence in this world, not indulgence, but interaction with this world. The Gemara says several times, Kol anoder ki'ilu bana bama. So it's not talking about a nazir, it's talking about a noder, someone that takes a neder, but for our purposes, let's assume it's the same. A chumrah, this is asur, this is asur. It's like he built a bama. What's wrong with a bama? A bama were these side spaces where you could bring a mizbeach, even when the Mishkan was operating, but not when it was in Shiloh, and certainly not when we had the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And bamas were always viewed skeptically by Chazal, and of course the famous bama, the bama of Micha, the almost bama of Ruvain, Gad, Mechasi, Sheva, Menashe, and Ever Yarden. What's wrong with a bama? There's a lot to unpack, and I don't want the shir to be too long and too varied, but there's a certain appeal to a bama because you're not with everyone else. And everyone is walking through the Beis HaMikdash and bringing their korbanos, and it's routine, and you're waiting online, and after the day's over, there's a big billboard in the Beis HaMikdash, how many korbanos were offered that day, and you're just a small little nothing, a small little number, and you mold into the woodwork. And a bama is your private backyard bama, and it's yours, and you feel that your bama may be superior to another person's bama because you can out-bama someone else. You can't really out-korban someone else in the Beis HaMikdash because sheep are sheep and goats are goats, and maybe a little bit here or there with the korban olav. If you're wealthy, you bring animals. If you're a little less wealthy, you bring birds. And a little less wealthy, you bring oil and flour. But those are very limited korbanos. So basically, everything in the Beis HaMikdash is uniform and conforming and similar and identical. All of a sudden, you want to show that your bama is better than the other person's bama. And it can lead to very showy, ostentatious, exhibitionist religious practice that you take just for people to see and gawk at you and know how firm you are. And of course, that can lead not just to ostentation, but to arrogance and to haughtiness and to holier than thou, which is the flip side. Ostentation is showing off your religion, and the motive behind showing off religion, or the consequence of showing off religion, is you start to feel superior to other people and their avodas Hashem, and you start to be dismissive either internally or externally in the way that you speak about them and the way that you treat them. And the Nazir is adopting, going back to Nazir for a second, the Gemara is talking about a noder, which can be taken in private. You can asur a cup of water for yourself that no one knows about, but the Nazir's Isurim are very, very public. They're very social. Everyone sees his hair. I think the Kli Yakar talks about that, but it's not just that. Everyone gathers for the funeral. Funeral is a communal event. Nazir can't show up. Everyone gathers for a wedding. Wedding is a communal event. Nazir says, I'm not drinking. It's Kiddush time. He's not drinking. His hair, his hygiene. He didn't take an extra chumrah to be more makbid on lashon hara, to be more makbid on kibbud avayim, to be more makbid on, I don't know, v'afta l'recha kamocha, or lasono, not to say something that hurts another person. His chumras were very, very showy and very public, and either they may be a product of arrogance and holier than thou and halachic supremacy and smugness, or if they're not and they were innocent, they can certainly cause it. And the korban chatos is meant to preempt some of this from happening, to put him back in his place, to kol machote. And I think we see that people who adopt chumras, the chumras tend to be very public. The kashrus you keep, that everyone knows what types of kashrus you keep, the way you dress, everyone knows the way you dress. The boy and the girl come home from yeshiva in Israel, and they daven as if with frenetic energy for everyone to see how they're davening, how long the Shemona Esrei is, rather than very quiet chumras, which are, as I said before, very intimate moments of us encountering Hashem and being careful about Isurim and being careful in ways that no one really knows about. And if we stretch beyond chumras and ask ourselves, has religion become showy, and has religion become competitive, and has religion become one-upsmanship, and have chumras played a role in that? I think we all feel that, at least in certain communities, it is. And that's, of course, a very disingenuous and hurtful and harmful and counterproductive and poisonous type of avodas Hashem. That's what Chazal meant when they talked about a kardam lach barbo. You're using religion to peddle your own interests, and these are smug interests. These are not just profit to make a little money here or there, but it's really antithetical to avodas Hashem to be smug and haughty and condescending, and all of a sudden, as I said before, to feel that you know who's more religious and who's less religious. I think I talked about this last week in the Bamidbar Shir. So these are three aspects, but again, I want to keep the Shir around 20 minutes. Chumras are very valuable parts of Avodas Hashem. They're the sign of someone that brings heightened religious consciousness, heightened worry in a healthy way, heightened Yiras Shamayim, Asis Yagla Torah. Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be machmir. There are chumras even in the Torah itself, although most of the chumras are midrabanan. And our legacy is not just to step up to the edge of the cliff and make sure we don't fall over into the world of chait, but to make sure we avoid the edge of the cliff entirely. But we all feel that chumras, when misapplied, can sometimes go off the rails. And Nazir is a metaphor for three ways in which it can go off the rails, and that's why the Torah, while calling him Kodesh, Kadosh is also calling him Mechote. Number one, it can upend the very delicate balance between engagement and disengagement from the world. It can cast religion as heavy and anxiety-ridden, rather than a flow and a fluidity. And second of all, it can distort the boundary between halacha proper and minhagim or chumros. And then finally, it can lead to ostentatiousness and showiness and exhibitionist and look at me and my firmkeit. And worse, it can lead to arrogance and condescension and holier than thou. So let's make sure that we apply chumrah in the right way. Generally, if it's quiet, it's a good thing. If your chumrah is so quiet and no one sees it and you do it, if you haven't tried it before, take my advice. It's a really powerful experience to know that it's you and Hashem in a room and no one knows what you're doing. And that takes real courage and real guts. Shabbat Shalom.